Welcome to a panel discussion about REACH codes and the banning of natural gas in the city of Los Altos, California. These codes are being considered for all new residential and commercial building construction and all scrape remodels. What is a REACH code? A REACH code is a local building energy code that reaches beyond the state minimum requirements for energy, and it's for use in building design and construction. REACH codes create opportunities for local governments to lead the way for clean air, climate solutions, and renewable energy economics. For the city of Los Altos, specifically, the REACH codes will prohibit natural gas in all new building construction, commercial and residential, and there will be some allowance for other gas lines being allowed into backyard areas. There are additional components of REACH codes that include electric vehicle charging stations. So this discussion is a production of a group of residents of Los Altos, California, known as LAR, Los Altos Residents. We believe that residents' voices need to be heard and acted upon by our city. We're neighbors seeking a resident focus for city government through organization, education, and action. We believe that a well-informed and engaged citizenry will lead to better decision-making by our city government. And we believed in fact-based decision-making by accurately assessing the majority of residents' opinions. So that's why we've organized this panel discussion. My name is Scott Spielman, and I will be your moderator today. The format for today will be presentations by three experts in the field of energy and its delivery mechanisms. Each speaker will present his point of view for 8 to 10 minutes. There will be a time for questions and answers at the end. Our objective today is to enable these experts with varying backgrounds and opinions to address the subject of REACH codes in energy delivery in a factual and important way. Our first speaker today is Tom Cabot. He's an energy and utility consultant. He's been a consultant in this capacity since 1979. He has his environmental engineering degree from Cal Poly, which he received in 1982. He also received a mechanical engineer PE license in the state of California in 1984. He's an energy auditor, an energy modeler. He's a gas and electric utility resource planner, and he's done that since 1982. He serves as an environmental quality commissioner in a nearby city, Menlo Park, California. And he served in many environmental capacities, including Menlo Spark, carbon-free Silicon Valley, Sunwork, fossil-free buildings. Tom has renewable energy experience as a solar engineer and board member and volunteer installer in a solar nonprofit. Tom, we welcome you. Thank you for being part of today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Scott, and members of Los Altos residents. Let me switch over here to sharing my screen. And there we go. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. And so that covers my first slide. Let's go to advance. There we go. So back to the topic at hand is REACH codes for new construction in Los Altos, and what they are, how they apply, and what they might mean for folks. So REACH codes are locally adopted variations on the statewide energy code and also on the statewide green code. The green code applies to EV charging, kind of setting the number of electric vehicle chargers that a residence or new office building needs to put in. So the state allows cities to take a look at the base code and decide if they want to adjust it in ways that are still cost effective and that can save just as much energy or more and create the additional benefits that the local community may be after. So these REACH codes last only up to 3 years. The current set of REACH codes will last through December 2022. They let the communities have local control. So we have our locally elected officials listening to the community and looking at their chance to figure out, do they want to just go along with what the whole statewide base code is that was a compromise between all different kinds of communities and interests, or do they want to customize something that better fits their local situation, maybe the mix of resources nearby or the power supply, like the very clean power supply by Silicon Valley Clean Energy that supplies Los Altos. And do they want to take advantage of that to do something like electrify? So this is the opportunity to go above and beyond base codes. And then these REACH codes also act as kind of policy progress demonstrations that can inform the development of the state policy. So that gives a chance for communities like Los Altos to show their leadership and to try something new and generate results that the state can look at and decide if the state wants to migrate in that direction set by a community like Los Altos. So why REACH codes? For me, it's looking like climate change will be the defining challenge of civilization. We are building up greenhouse gases way beyond the levels that existed during any part of civilization in the past. And we are now the generation that understands this. The information has leaked out of the researchers who provided it first for the oil companies. And now finally it's available to the public at large. And there's no longer plausible deniability about the effects of these gases on the climate. So our legacies are at stake. We are known to know what is happening. And so folks will look back to see, okay, they knew, and then how did they act? So we can make it a lot better by acting now with the technologies we already have. And we can tell that it will cost less to fight climate change than it will to go slow and let climate change happen. If we go slow, the damage costs that build up from rising sea levels and increasing firestorms and more radical drought and flood patterns, those swamp all other costs. I notice in Menlo Park, just the cost of building sea level or building levees to handle sea level rise of just 1 meter to 2 meters, it would cost up to $400 million to protect parts of our community that would be flooded by 1 meter of sea level rise. Then also the Paris Accord, it sets a cooperative path forward for reining in climate change. And it lets nations and subnational entities like the state of California produce plans and compare them on an open stage in order to be able to show cooperative progress forward. And it helps develop that peer pressure that gets countries around the world working on the problem. And here's the chance for Los Altos leadership to help California step up its game, which helps other countries step up their game. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, scientists told us in 2018 that we have about only 9.5 years remaining to 2030 to substantially reduce emissions to have a chance to hold to the 2 degrees Celsius warming that they found might be tolerable. So they recommend progress and policies that are rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented. So what do we see from comparing the COVID-19 response policies? It's given us kind of a very fast time model of what it's like to do laissez-faire policies where you let people do whatever they want versus collective policies that address the collective problems. So you can see by looking at the different countries of the world and in fact even different states and look at how did they do things? Were they rapid? Were they far-reaching? Did they take unprecedented measures? And how effective were they? So we see lots of experiment results there that are somewhat translatable to the climate problem. where we are, we've got electric appliances now that have greatly improved in the past couple of decades with digital controls and variable speed motors and computer logic, smart technologies. So electric heat pumps are now 4 times as efficient as gas furnaces. They do that by using electricity to grab outdoor heat and pump it up to a useful temperature and use it in the building. And it doesn't take much energy to just pump up the temperature of heat. So also heat pump water heaters are 3 to 4 times as efficient as gas water heaters, and induction cooktops are better, faster, cleaner cooking than my old gas cooktop. I just changed mine out last week. And according to most cooks that try them, they are better. And also according to Consumer Reports, where recently 8 of the top 10 cooktops were all induction cooktops, 2 were gas. So methane is kind of a double climate problem. Methane is the main ingredient, the active ingredient in natural gas. It's doubly potent because it's 30 times worse if it's leaked than if it's burnt, and it's bad if it's burnt. So it's bad when you burn it, 30 times worse when you leak it. And if there's leakage around 3%, that roughly doubles the global warming impact of the natural gas. So it's the prime thing to remove from our new construction, and just to build our buildings without the fossil fuel equipment and the expense of it. The Carnegie Institution has found through a study that if we run our existing fossil-fired equipment to the remainder of its useful life, it raises temperatures between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius globally. So that eats up all of the climate space we have, just running the existing equipment. So that's why we don't need to cite any new gas-fired or fossil equipment. We don't have the climate budget for new fossil devices. And these sound small, but 2 degrees Celsius warming has 4 times the suffering, damage, and economic woes of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is not a very linear scale. We need to really pay attention to the problem and get on top of it. So in the new construction code, the base code that's already applied in Los Altos as of January 1, it requires that a small solar system be put on new construction anyway. And then additional solar doesn't cost very much. Once you're already going to be building the small system, you may as well upsize it. The additional solar costs maybe 1/4 as much as grid power. And so that's some pretty cheap electricity to power the new loads that you would have. And also any new loads that aren't powered by your on-site solar are going to be matched by renewable purchases each year by Silicon Valley Clean Energy. They have a policy to keep up with annual matching of the amounts of electric sales with the amounts of renewable and carbon-free electric purchases. They use large hydropower and then California politically qualified renewables as their resources. So gas prices will rise as delivery volumes shrivel in California, as the state gets serious about pursuing its climate targets and getting towards carbon neutrality. It will be reducing the flow of gas through the system as people shift over, and trying to amortize the remaining pipe costs across the reduced flows will leave gas prices rising 4 to 6 times their current levels, according to studies done for the state. Electric prices can avoid rising much by grabbing onto market share from gasoline and from natural gas. So by putting even more volume through the electric system to amortize its costs across more volume, it can keep its rates low.
I'd like to ask you, Tom, if you can wrap up in 1 more minute, please.
All right. So reach codes take a fresh look at buildings, and we find that by skipping the cost of installing gas pipes and exhaust management equipment, exhaust stacks and all that, they can save about $10,000 per new building. And so that also makes the buildings faster to build and easier to inspect. And all electric homes and buildings are safer and healthier. They don't have indoor air pollution to the extent that the gas ones have, and they have better life cycle economics. So in conclusion, Los Altos can join other Reach Code cities around us and help transform the construction market to make clean, safe, resilient electric buildings become the norm. And Los Altos would be helping modern electrification spread statewide. That can make electric buildings become the new normal faster. And Both of these things will make it easier and cheaper for people to convert existing homes when they choose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. We appreciate your insights and your expertise. Our second speaker today is Robert Sandor. Robert is an electrical engineer who has transitioned several Silicon Valley IT-based companies from startups to full production operations. He served in executive roles at DirecTV, everybody knows them, Neoforma, which is a healthcare company, Ricoh, and General Magic, and a couple other companies. He has an MS degree in electrical engineering from Stanford University and a BS in electrical and computer science from UC Berkeley. I wonder what he does at the big game. Robert believes that energy is a fundamental resource for all society, and as such should be used wisely, and distribution systems for energy should be based upon solid design principles. He has concerns that current political pressures upon California's electrical grid deployment will violate best engineering practices and result in unreliable, expensive outcomes that will harm rather than benefit us. Robert, we welcome you today. We welcome your insights.
Hi, thank you, Scott. Thank you, fellow participants, and thank you, City of Los Altos. Really quickly, just want to say in the big game, I root for whichever team is ahead. So I'm lucky by being both Cal, Stanford. Okay, so a little bit about my perspectives of REACH goals. I believe they'll actually increase energy bills, in reality, increase CO2 emissions. Okay. So Tom did a good job about the current REACH goals, new construction. And I think this is easy to accomplish. It's also a little bit evil to accomplish in that essentially the community that's getting affected is new residents in Los Altos wanting new construction. So they're not here to represent themselves. After this, the second REACH goal is going to be to force any remodel constructions to disconnect any natural gas. The third REACH goal is going to be, anytime you want to replace a major appliance, example, if you need to replace your gas furnace, you'll only be able to replace it with an electrical one. And then the final REACH goal is going to be into your pocket for more money for electricity. So who's behind this? And Tom mentioned our local CCA of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. CCA is a community choice aggregator, and essentially it was created in the belief that your individual town councils as the leadership group will create greener energy than PG&E was able to do. Los Altos entered into the CCA with 9 other cities in 2016. In fact, Los Altos invested $250,000 itself to start the venture. Okay, there are a number of other CCAs participating in this type of effort. CCAs are essentially created by a lobbying group called Cal CCA, who invented the scheme for California. The other CCA who's very active in this is Peninsula Clean Energy. That's the CCA for the county of San Mateo, which your Los Altos mayor, Jan Pepper, is actually the CEO of PC&E. I believe there's a this creates a big conflict of interest between the towns who run these CCAs and are responsible for the success of the CCA, and yet are dictating building codes upon us. Okay, just a little bit more about SVCA, what it's not. SVCE does not generate electricity, okay? They don't have any generation resources. They don't create solar farms, they don't create wind farms, no generation resources at all, okay? SVCE does not operate the electricity grid, okay? Cal ISO is a government entity responsible for operation of the grid. SVCE does not deliver electricity. PG&E remains responsible for the delivery of the electricity from generation to end user. SVCE does not bill for the electricity used. PG&E is responsible for creating and collecting the bills. And they're not the provider of last resort. If you happen to not like SVCE, or if SVCE fails financially, PG&E has to be there to provide us electricity because they are the provider of last resort. Finally, SVCE doesn't sell natural gas. They only make more revenue by selling more electricity, so they have a natural conflict of interest. Okay, so what is SVCE? They're a joint power agency governed by a board of directors, which comprises of your town city members. Okay, they make all the contract and operational decisions. The way they do that is they write short-term and long-term contracts for the purchase of electricity from commercial generators. Most of SVCE's contracts, I believe, are with Calpine Corp. They are a sales and marketing organization who pitches the virtue of their supposedly green product. And you were opted into this in 2016 with extremely little notice. Most residents of Los Altos don't even know that SVCE is selling you electricity. In fact, they achieved 96% market share on day one of their business by the fact that they opted you in rather than allowing you to choose your way into SVCE. They happen to be losing a lot of business fast, as a lot of their commercial customers have more choices available for them, and so they are under pressure. Okay? They don't base their service based upon their costs. Okay, if you watch any of their board meetings, they solely base their price to be within a few dollars a month of PG&E. Okay, their claim is that the energy that they are providing you is carbon-free. That's their basis for the claim that getting rid of natural gas appliances and replacing them with electrical is good. For an additional fee, they'll claim that you're only purchasing 100% renewable energy. In reality, they do very little. And they claim they do all sorts of wonderful things for the community. Okay, so here is their carbon label, which is unaudited by any state agency. They're claiming that this is the mixture of their electricity. You'll see a large percentage of that is large hydroelectric. You can compare their mix with the state mix and see how they differ. Okay, but in general, they're claiming most of the energy that they sell is coming from hydroelectric. The truth is, let's talk about large hydro. Okay, large hydro has always been a part of the mix of energy in California. In essence, there's no major dams, reservoirs being built, and this has always been one of our lowest sources of electricity. So the claim that their power is more green than PG&E is essentially false. Yeah, we've always used large hydro. There's no more coming online. They claim they're using biomass. This is burning trees and wood, solar and wind. A lot of the resources that they claim are providing us electricity are not actually providing electricity to your household. In a lot of ways, these numbers are provided for by RECs, renewable energy certificates, that we'll talk about in a second. Okay, so let's talk about RECs. Okay, renewable energy certificates are a way that CCA can use system power, which is essentially natural gas plant generated in California, and claim it to be without emissions. Okay, it's essentially a greenwashing scheme. There are three types of RECs. One is pretty honest, the other is not so much. The first type of REC are called PCC1s, and this is essentially any solar or wind power plant in California. And if SVC is actually purchasing that power, then they can rightfully claim that's clean energy. The actual amount of that is very limited in California. Okay, PCTC2s are the second type of RECs, are where essentially SVCE is buying certificates from a energy wholesaler. The resource is outside of California. So let's say, for example, there's a Washington wind farm. Okay, well, that wind farm is creating a REC. The energy wholesale buyers that REC, they transfer it to SVCE. SVCE is then allowed to buy a natural gas powered plant and label that as CO2 free. Okay. REC 3s are very, very similar to that, except instead of buying it from a wholesaler, they're buying it from a producer. A lot of times, if you look at SVC's source of generation, they'll be in British Columbia or Wyoming or strange places like that, places where that power is never delivered to the California grid. So you're using a lot of natural gas power. Okay, so just keep in mind, solar in general is available kind of, generally less than 8 hours a day. There's no economical current way to store it. Wind is the same, is the same way. Wind power is generated, generally available at about 30% of the wind turbine rating. Again, no economical way to store it. The no hydro plants being built. Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which is the one base load providing service of emission-free energy, is going to be decommissioned soon. The only replacement on the horizon, expanded use of existing natural gas plants. If you look at the California Energy Commission, you'll see that there's no major grid-scale solar, wind, natural gas power plants being built. Essentially no energy provider wants to deal with the California government interference. And there's no economic justification to build new major solar power plants. Okay, and a couple of years ago, the state PUC had forced SVCE to pay RA fee, or resource adequacy fee. And that's essentially a fee to compensate CalISO with the fact that power sources that SVCE contract for are not reliable. And therefore, in order to operate the grid reliably, CalISO has to buy energy from natural gas plants. SVCE buries this in their rates. They don't disclose this.
We'd like to ask you, if you would, Robert, to wrap up in 1 minute, please.
Hey, thank you. Okay, I will do that fast. So essentially, your natural gas is your energy is coming from natural gas, whatever they say, and we pay in SVCE between 2 and 5 times the amount of for electricity as our neighboring states. I'll just skip through my slides about natural gas appliances and just summarize this way. Remember, our electric grid is fairly unreliable these days. PG&E is able to deliver electricity is extremely unreliable. Our grid itself is becoming more unreliable as we're forced to take on more unreliable sources. And our prices for energy are going to skyrocket when Diablo Canyon is taken offline. Natural gas has been underground safely. It's extremely reliable. I've got a $600 natural gas powered generator. When my power goes off, I can continue to heat my home, water, etc. And my final sad thought is this has already been decided by the Los Altos Town Council, happened in Los Altos Hills. So do what you can to fight for your right to choose whatever energy source you believe works best for you and your family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Our third speaker is Dr. Frank Wolak. Dr. Wolak is a Holbrook Working Professor of Commodity Price Studies in the Department of Economics at Stanford University. His fields of—
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's good. Thank you. I want more time to talk. They can go to my website. Can I share my screen?
Go for it.
Thanks. Yeah. No need for long introductions. Thank you. All right, so hopefully that's shared. So the question that I want to do is just to address this question here, which is, does the natural gas distribution have a role to play in getting a low carbon California? And, you know, California has extremely ambitious climate goals. They have the goal of 100% renewable energy by 2045. They want to electrify the vehicle fleet. A challenge that a number of the previous speakers have referred to is the intermittency of the supply of energy from renewables such as wind and solar. This can occur at both ends of the distribution grid. In other words, when you're injecting into the local distribution grid from the utility scale wind and solar units, as well as when you're at the site of the house, where you're essentially only pulling from the grid what is not effectively consumed on site from the solar photovoltaic panels that are on your roof. So there's two sources of intermittency that have certainly been creating challenges for the various transmission and distribution network owners in California. What this intermittency and these ambitious renewable energy goals have done in California has essentially what's significantly lowered what's called the capacity factor of the existing gas-fired generation fleet. And in particular, a major owner of the gas-fired fleet in California is Calpine. Not to say anything against that, but they are providing, they are operating at what's called a much lower capacity factor, which is the annual output that they actually produce divided by the potential output that they could produce if the unit could run all hours of the year. And as we scale up the amount of renewables, this trend is likely to continue, in particular, lower capacity factors, but not zero capacity factors for these natural gas-fired generation units. So this gives you a time series of the investments in grid scale wind and solar capacity in the California ISO control area. The California ISO is the market operator for the California, virtually all of California. And you can see that there's been a fairly steady increase in solar investments starting in early on, largely driven by the state's renewable energy goals. The state has renewable portfolio standards, not as rapid increase in wind investments, but what this has left us with is still, in spite of these massive investments in renewables, we're still getting the largest share of the electricity in California is produced from natural gas. As you can see, that's the large brown area in the middle. And in spite of the fact that the yellow area, which has been solar PV, has increased, and wind has slightly increased as well, as you can see. And the other is that's important is the fact that you can see that the nuclear, which is the down at the bottom here, is declining as with the retirement of the San Onofre nuclear generating facility, and that nuclear is going to go to zero in about a year or two when Diablo Canyon retires, and that's a quite substantial share of energy that's likely to be replaced, most likely with natural gas-fired generation. So the big thing that this amount of renewables does in California is it essentially creates this situation where we have roughly this 14,000 megawatts of grid-scale solar coming in, plus we have about 7,000 megawatts of distributed solar. So that's solar on rooftops of buildings and houses that is producing. And what has to happen is that the difference between the total system demand in California and the production from these renewable facilities has to be met. This is what's called the net load. It has to be met by what's called controllable generation resources. And these controllable or dispatchable generation resources need to respond very quickly. And ideally suited to do that very rapid response is natural gas-fired generation units, hence the reason that those natural gas-fired generation units are online and operating in California. And this just takes an example of the net load from a date in California in 2019, for the obvious reason that this is more typical of the load levels that we see, not the COVID level load levels. But what you can see is the green line is the system demand. The sort of purple line, that is the net load. In other words, that is the difference between that demand and renewable production. So no surprise, in the middle of the day when solar is producing a lot, the net load is very low. So in other words, what you need to be meeting with these thermal resources, the natural gas-fired units, is between, say 12,000 megawatts. But what's true is you can see that when it gets dark at night, we have this rapid increase in the net load because the solar is disappearing. And so this is what means I've got to turn on a bunch of these natural gas-fired generation units. I got to run them really fast, just like think of it as you're accelerating your car very fast to essentially keep up. And that's what's necessary to keep the lights on. This pattern, happens every single day. So what it means is that the thermal resources, these natural gas-fired units, are used, but just not used as intensively. They are used to fill in when the solar disappears. They are used to essentially turn off when the solar reappears. So to give an idea of the extent of this intermittency in wind and solar in California, what I've done is just give you a histogram of the hourly output in 2019. So think of it as the output in each hour. We binned it into these little bars, and you can see, and we've not included zeros. So in other words, the value of zero is excluded. So you can see, and at the bottom, I've told you that for the case of wind, it's very rare that we get zero output, but clearly for solar, roughly 40% of the hours we get zero output, largely because it is dark. But what you can see is a lot of concentration at very low load levels. And this is essentially just summing those two things up and doing the same thing. And it's important, as I said, to recognize that California has roughly 20,000 megawatts of wind and solar. And what I've done here is I've said, okay, let's just do this for each year, do the same sort of calculation. And the line that I put in red is, I think, the one that is very important to bear in mind. And that is saying that the median level of output that I am getting from this 20,000 megawatts of wind and solar capacity in California in 2019 is, as you can see, is roughly 3,200 megawatt hours. So in other words, that's saying that 50% of the hours of the year, I'm getting less energy than that number from this 20,000 megawatts of wind and solar capacity, hence the need for these controllable resources to fill in for those resources. And the other thing about California that's quite important to bear in mind is we have a situation where when we get a lot of solar, we also get a lot of wind. So if you look at the diagram on the lower left here that shows the wind production seasonally in California, you can see that we get a lot of production in the summer from wind, and obviously a lot of production from solar in the summer. And so if we're really interested in making this transition to the renewable goals that we want to have, we're going to need a lot of storage, a lot of ability to essentially take the excess renewable energy that may be produced perhaps in the summer when unfortunately demand is also very high. And we're going to have to store that both and be able to use it potentially during the winter months. And how do we do that? Well, as I say here, for within day storage, so for example, for the fact that I've got a solar panel on my roof, it might make sense that I have a battery as well, and I just store the solar energy in my battery. And then at night, when I want to turn the lights on and other things, I'm consuming that excess solar from the battery. That works well. But what about the fact that there can be very long durations of low renewables output, as I showed in the table? And, you know, so batteries, you're going to need massive, massive, massive amounts of batteries. And so what is a likely alternative solution? Well, one such alternative solution is to make use of the existing natural gas-fired generation capacity. We have roughly 42 gigawatts of that in California. And so if we have lots of renewable energy, we can essentially use that and we can produce first hydrogen through electrolysis, take water, electricity, produce hydrogen. And then if we, and if we want, we can then go the next step and take the hydrogen, combine it with a CO2 source and produce essentially methane. But that methane is essentially, if you like, zero net carbon methane. And so we can first blend the hydrogen with the natural gas in the pipeline and feed those to the natural gas units. Up to about 20% of hydrogen will essentially allow you to significantly green your natural gas source that you burn in your natural gas unit. And moreover, you can then even put the green methane in the existing natural gas pipeline infrastructure and deliver that to power plants. So one of the big thing is that it seems pretty likely, and there are a number of sort of pilot projects going on in California and other parts of the world, that hydrogen and natural gas produced from renewable energy are going to be an important source of zero carbon technology for seasonal storage. So, you know, you could literally use the hydrogen mixed with natural gas or green gas delivered to households for space heating, for cooking, to provide a zero input fuel for the natural gas generation used at grid scale. And so having households with access to the natural gas distribution network, I think, can facilitate a least cost transition to this achievement of California's renewable future, because it provides households with essentially options to heat, as well as options for the case that Robert just talked about, for his on-site natural gas generator could use this gas delivered through the existing network to actually produce electricity when the sun is not shining or other kinds of things. So, you know, if you're interested in really addressing this problem, the all of the above strategy that says, look, we think that we can make use of this existing network, we can produce these green gases, we can solve the dispatchable energy problem through storing this either as the excess renewable energy as hydrogen or as green gas. That can enable the network in California to actually become 100% or close to 100% renewable, even though we are continuing to operate the natural gas facilities, and it's because we're using them to burn this green gas. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. Now I'd like to move us on to some questions. What's been mentioned are the possibilities that renewable energy sources can be depleted during different times of the day. And so what will be the alternatives? What energy sources used when renewable energy is exhausted? And so what are the implications for that? So anyone want to start with that question?
I can certainly, I mean, as you can see from the graph that I showed in my presentation, currently virtually all of the energy that is not being produced from, say, wind and solar is being produced by either nuclear or natural gas. Those are the two, those two sources are producing the vast majority of California's electricity. Those are the ones filling in. There are some hydro facilities in the state. There is a very large pump storage facility which essentially is a hydro facility that is also used. But for the most part, it is, as it says, it's coming from natural gas and nuclear.
And I will just chime in a little bit to say, yeah, essentially, realistically, in California today, there's very little other than the the small pumped hydro. Batteries are just far too small, and their storage capacities are just far too limited. The talk of having batteries as to back up your solar storage on your home, that's a fine idea, but when it comes to big load electricity use, such as heating your house in the wintertime when there's very little solar available, you could never afford enough batteries to heat your home in the wintertime.
Tom, would you like to chime in?
Sure. It's good to hear what people are noticing about the grid. As a electric and gas utility planner who started in 1982, I've seen a lot of evolution of the grid, evolution of the power sources. I helped negotiate lots of power purchase agreements where I worked for City of Palo Alto's utility, where we would negotiate the agreements that would get the projects developed so that it could grow that portfolio that Dr. Wallach mentioned is now around 15 gigawatts of solar and 7 gigawatts of wind in the state. It's not trivial, like Robert was mentioning. It's a lot of power, and so it's out there. It's real. It can be developed by CCEs and utilities writing contracts for power purchase agreements that gets the stuff built and delivered via the Cal ISO to the cities who are buying it. So there's a lot of renewables happening, but I also agree with both speakers that the grid is in transition, that it started with a high fossil dominance and it's transitioning to a lower fossil dominance, but I don't think that'll go to zero either, in the very near term. So that storage is needed.
So the question really as a follow-up is if California is going to lose its nuclear generation in 2025, will it have sufficient energy without nuclear and natural gas? Will there be enough renewables, and when will they be available?
I can try to address it. So California lost half of its nuclear in 2011. It's planning to voluntarily shut down the other half in 2025. There is, plenty of gas generation, as both speakers mentioned. There's a lot of gas generation that's sitting ready to run, and there's a lot of natural gas around. So there's plenty of natural gas to run the grid. That is not hard. The type of things that happen with a REACH code is that people put in heat pumps that are 4 times as efficient, and so they actually use less grid energy to do the heating. It takes less natural gas put into a gas-fired power plant to run a heat pump than it takes to put the gas into a furnace to heat the home the same amount. It's a way to stretch that natural gas that both other speakers recognize as precious.
Robert?
Yeah, I will say if you look at some modern gas-fired furnaces, you get a 96% efficient gas-powered furnace for your home, and that's going to net use a lot less natural gas than if you would have used natural gas to power a gas turbine. Take the generation loss at the turbine plant, take the distribution loss through distributing that power all the way through the electrical grid. So net, a electric heat pump to heat your house in the winter in California will create more emissions essentially rather than less. So that's kind of the irony of this. If your intention is to create something that uses creates less carbon dioxide, then the best thing would be to install your own 96% efficient gas-powered furnace in your home.
Yeah, I mean, given that, think of it, the easiest way to see the logic in that is that what is happening on a cold winter day that's cloudy? you're not getting much, neither much wind or much solar energy. You're producing most of the electricity with natural gas, and as Robert said, it's going through the transmission line with losses, it's going through the distribution line with losses. It also is being produced by a combined cycle natural gas facility that has almost a 50% efficiency in terms of its ability to convert the heat into electricity. So it's tough to beat. Now, to the extent that you got gobs of renewables, that calculate and you're consuming stored renewable energy, that could change. But we're far from there at the moment.
So if I could address the two examples just put forward
I'd like
by
to
the
move
other
on.
speakers with numbers.
Can you do it
using,
quickly? Excuse me.
sure, just using a 55%. Using a 55% efficiency on that combined cycle power plant that Dr. Wallach mentioned, and a 7% transmission and distribution losses across the grid means that 51% of the energy makes it to the property. And then if you put it into a heat pump with a coefficient of 4.0, then that turns into 200% of the gas's initial chemical energy is available as heat in the building, compared to the 96% that Robert mentioned for the best available furnace. So 200% is more than 96%.
Careful of the laws of thermodynamics is all I would say.
I am.
You may want to revisit your course in thermodynamics, but that's a separate argument.
Oh no, I'm fine with my.
I need to move on.
I'm fine. Thank you for the suggestion to revisit my courses.
What happens in the event of a power outage in an all-electric home? What are the ways that people can have heat, hot water, and cooking?
Is that for me?
Why don't we start with Robert this time?
Well, yeah, I'll only bring up my own example. I've got a $600, little generator. Yeah, I have to run extension cords around my house, but it's got and it runs on natural gas, and I've never had an outage in natural gas. With that little $600 generator, I can continue heating my house. It's got enough to run the fan of my natural gas furnace. It will run my water heating, my cooking. I cook with natural gas. I watch TV. All my computers run. So yeah, natural gas to me, for a $600 backup generator at a time when PG&E is failing, and the grid is going to be failing more. I mean, we've seen the outages with PG&E's distribution network, and as we try to pump more intermittent, dilute sources of energy into the grid, is my belief that the grid itself will be subject to more failures. We saw that in the era of Gray Davis. I can see that happening again.
Frank? Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely you think of sort of range anxiety in your electric vehicle on steroids. I mean, you could have a battery at your house, but that's the big problem. It's a classic diversification story, and that one of the big arguments I would think for having a natural gas connection to your house and heating with natural gas and having that option is, yes, you will have the ability to stay warm in the times when there is a sustained outage. So, or you have to purchase a quite expensive battery, but then it will likely run out if that lasts too long.
All right, and if I could take us back to the REACH codes for new construction, looking at the case now is Los Altos has the base code, which requires efficient electric equipment, like Robert mentioned, that 96% efficient furnace needs electricity to run. So if in a power outage, the gas customer doesn't have heat, and they don't have any hot water either, because the code requires a tankless gas water heater. Efficiency is that high that there's no stored water. The all-electric house, on the other hand, might have the 80-gallon heat pump water heater with 80 gallons of hot water. That's still hot the next morning. There's still 40 gallons of hot water left in it. And plus they've got 80 gallons of water for after the quake. The tankless guy doesn't have any water after the quake. So, you know, the gas homes aren't more resilient in this new construction regime. The electric homes are more resilient. Both homes do need a propane camp stove to deal with either the gas outage or the electric outage. So that's true. They both need that. Up in Healdsburg, when they did the PSPS in 2019, they had the electricity back on within 2 days, but the gas was still out for another 4 days. So people, you know, just couldn't get their gas back up because it's a more dangerous chemical that it took PG&E a while to check on.
Robert, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my gas powered generator also runs on, yeah, you could go to the gas station, buy a few gallons of gas and put it in. Okay, I assure you, my gas furnace, it does run on electricity as well, but my generator will power the gas furnace. So I will have a warm house. And you know, why put all your eggs in one basket? Okay, so yeah, you're saying an all electric house is more reliable than you know, a home that has both gas, natural gas, and electricity available to it with different kind of reliabilities and different outage conditions. Yeah, it doesn't seem to add more sense, make more sense to me. I think another unintended consequence you'll find with this is if you try to prohibit natural gas from new construction, people will end up burying propane tanks in their yards. Okay, and you'll find that you'll have propane tanks now, yeah, driving all over our neighborhoods, delivering propane because people still like, for a lot of use, to use natural gas. One is for cooking. A lot of Asian cooking is around wok cooking, and wok cooking tends to be easier with natural gas than it does with induction.
Let me move us on. What's the average cost of a battery storage system for an average, say, 2,500 square foot home? Anybody have any idea? You know, if we need a battery storage system.
Yeah, battery. I don't think there's any one answer to that because it depends on how much you want to back up. Okay, if you want to run a few light bulbs around your house in a power emergency, you don't need very much battery backup. If you want to keep your TVs and your internet, you don't need much power backup. If you want to heat your home, if you want to heat your water, and you want to heat your and you want to cook your meals with battery backup, yeah, you'll spend $100,000 to do that.
Let me move on to the question of environment. Why do clean energy companies like SVCE believe that they're providing emissions-free energy to their customers? Who'd like to go?
I'm not convinced they are, but it's because it sells. It'd be my guess. In particular, one thing is that interestingly enough, under the state's renewable portfolio standard, large hydro does not count as renewable energy. And so this is one of the ways that the CCAs essentially arbitrage the renewable portfolio standard. So if I'm PG&E and I have to meet the RPS, the renewable portfolio standard, I have to buy things that are qualified renewables, whereas the CCAs can essentially claim that they are buying renewable energy if it is a large hydro, and as Robert did say, that these are not renewable resources that are registered with the Western Regional Renewable Energy Registry because they do not qualify for the RPS. So, I mean, this pure and simple, this sells, and that's why I think it's done. But you know, most of this is like I said, is you know, the regulatory rules, and you know, essentially it's that people believe it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I will chime in and say that there's a lot of money to be made in this industry. Okay, I think Cal CCA as a lobbying industry has made an enormous amount, and your town's participation. I mean, your town got 96% of all customers by opting you in. Okay, so there's a lot of money being,
That's true for all CCAs. Every
yeah,
CCA, it's an opt. You have to opt out not to be put in.
right.
So
But
it's
but
nothing
that
special to Los Altos.
no, yeah, absolutely true, Frank. But it was Cal CCA who presented it as an an automatic opt-in. So there's a lot of money being made in this industry, and I'm not saying that your town government is getting rich doing it, but there's an awful lot of money in pursuing green.
Tom?
Electric resource planner who had to do this type of thing. I'd like to try to answer it correctly. The power content label has to be filled out by the CCEs as well as the regular utilities, so they're both doing that. They put the large hydro in the large hydro where it belongs, and then they put the qualified renewables where they belong. So this is all getting counted. There's no sleight of hand going on here. What the CCE...
I'm not saying that. I was just simply saying that the RPS does not count large hydro. That's all.
Right.
No.
Right.
So
And
this is an arbitrage opportunity for the CCAs who yes, you can you say what what you're saying is truthful. Of course, I would not expect you to engage in fraud.
Right, and I don't, thank you. But what the CCEs are doing is filling out power content labels, and then they're also promoting their product, hopefully as carbon-free, because it has both large hydro that's carbon-free and renewable, but not counted as renewable in California, and small hydro that does count as renewable in California, and then other renewables like wind and solar. So they count it all and they procure it for their portfolio. So they make it happen. As their loads go up, they procure more of those renewables and or large hydro. But I agree also with the other speaker saying we aren't building any more large hydro in the US. It's just something we don't do much of anymore. We've used the sites, so now we build renewables.
So and so any marginal use that we have, i.e. if we want to replace a lot of our gas appliances with electric, that electricity will not be coming from large hydro because there's no more of it. Okay, we've always used all of it that we can because it is the lowest cost source of electricity. We would have. In bad hydro years when we don't have much snow in the mountains, there's less of it available. So it's there's no more being built.
All right, well, let me move on. Thank you for your thoughts. Is there an auditing process used for CCAs to confirm that the energy that they receive is truly clean? Is there some kind of auditing process that's used?
As I said, with respect to if you're buying what's called qualified, so in the Western United States, so everything west of the Continental Divide, there is an inventory of renewable energy. So for example, every project that wants to be able to sell these renewable energy certificates to California entities that are complying with the state's renewable portfolio standard register their units there. And for each megawatt hour that they produce in energy, they actually have to, they receive one of these recs. So that works great. Where the problem starts to come in is when there are renewable resources that aren't in that registry because they don't count under these state mandated RPSs, such as the large hydro. And then, in the large hydro, it starts to say that perhaps the way that you would meet that compliance is essentially you have a contract with, say, the generator from that unit, and you would try to offer that. There's some wiggle room in there, and that's certainly one of the things that you have a more difficult time dealing with the potential for double counting in the case in which it's not a qualified. Because think of it as if you're in the Western renewable registry, you can only, you have to show the rec or give the rec to the entity that bought your renewable energy. So you can't double sell the renewable content of your resource. Whereas if it, is one of these that isn't qualified, there is this issue. But, and there are some potential, challenges in ensuring compliance.
I believe that the large hydro RECs are also tracked through the Regis system, and so that they're part of the power content label that gets state review as well. And then also you've been mentioning the buildup of money, or the follow the money type arguments. What the CCEs are doing is building up money that they then can deploy into programs to help decarbonize their communities, to help the communities meet their climate action plans and aggressively address climate action or carbon reduction as the scientists are telling us we need to do. So they are a great mechanism for putting some money to work on the solution and using electrification in a beneficial cycle.
Yeah, I do see that, and I do see their programs. If you want to look at a program that SVCE is doing, they are helping people subsidize putting in electric heat pump water heaters to replace natural gas. Okay, the average cost that they're spending on each project is is about $7,000. Okay, because in a lot of cases you have to replace a panel to have enough electricity to drive a heat pump water heater. Okay, so they spend about $5,000 to $10,000 per installation to replace natural gas. And effectively, if you look at the ratepayers, it's the poor subsidizing the rich. Okay, so they're taking electricity of ratepayers in poorer communities to subsidize people in Los Altos Hills who want to pursue green goals.
Yeah, so they're working on market transformation. In fact, SVCE is sponsoring a contractor training set of video classes being produced across this summer that'll help transform the market, because it's been this tiny market of willing plumbers who just want to harvest maximum dollars from the residents. And so we're trying to get more plumbers interested in taking this up, having it become a more competitive market to provide lower cost heat pump water heating installation.
I think that's a wonderful thing, but I'm not sure the ratepayers want to pay for that.
The one thing that I think is very important to bear in mind on this is that average residential retail prices in California are about 22 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you take the wholesale price, it's probably last year about 4 cents. The transmission and distribution charge is probably about 7 cents. So you get 11 cents. The difference between that 11 cents and that 22 cents is the recovery of the cost of all the things that are doing to pay people to put the energy efficiency in. So it's not that that money isn't coming from somewhere, it's coming from ratepayers. It's ratepayers paying more to essentially finance these things. And the interesting thing is it's quite expensive. And so, an interesting question is why aren't people, if these investments make economic sense for them, why aren't they doing it anyway? And I think that's one of certainly the big mystery to me is do we really need to prompt people to do things that are in their own financial interest?
Right, and I'll just go beyond that. And the more electric appliance you have, you're also faced with higher rate structures, because you go from tier 1, which is about, I guess it's 22 cents a kilowatt hour, to tier 2, which is 25. If you get into the final tier of electricity, you're paying 50 cents per kilowatt hour in California. So transitioning to something like a heat pump is going to force you into that penalty box where you're declared a bad person for wanting to use too much electricity. You'll pay 50 cents per kilowatt hour. And we're paying twice, 2 to 3 times as much as the rest of the country. Heck, we're paying twice as much as Palo Alto.
So one or two more questions. So what are the cradle to grave costs for an all-electric home versus a mixed-use home? And what are the cradle to grave environmental impacts of an all-electric home versus a mixed-use home? Do we have, I mean, you're the experts. Do you guys have any estimates of what the differences are? First, the cost environmentally, and the costs, secondly, financially to a consumer. This is cradle to grave costs, environment and financial of all electric versus mixed use homes. Anybody have a thought?
Well, I guess what I would say is an easy way to think about it is natural gas is extremely cheap given what we've had with the shale gas boom. And electricity, as we just discussed, is extremely expensive because of all the things that are sort of built into your retail rate. But the big question mark is I would say that it really is one of these things that depends upon, it's more of something I would argue that you need to do, a 50-page analysis of that question. But I guess I would first just say, look, let's just look at the simplest thing, which is we're awash in natural gas. We price retail electricity extremely high in California. It's really hard to see how you're going to lose if you go to this mix in terms of both gas and electricity versus all electric under the current rate regime. Now, if we could change the rate regime, it may be a different story. And so, that's why I say is that there's tons of moving parts, and there's a good argument, I think, to change how we price electricity in particular, because one of the big things that's happening in electricity is we're getting people to put solar panels on their roof that cost a heck of a lot more per megawatt hour of energy produced than if they put the solar panels in the middle of the Mojave Desert and produced electricity from that and delivered it to their house. So, but that's because I get to avoid, as Robert said, the 50 cents high marginal price by putting the solar panels on my roof and reducing my electricity demand. So it makes private sense for me, but publicly, from the perspective of society, that's not what we want, because we just increase the cost on everybody else because I'm withdrawing less from the grid and contributing less to all of these sunk cost recoveries.
And I'll just chime in with Frank and say, I think the next major change you're going to see is for people who have actually invested in rooftop solar. I think net metering is going to disappear, okay? Because using your own solar power on your own roof, you're a very bad customer of SVCE or PG&E. You're only depending on them to provide you reliable power, and you're offsetting that with unreliable power. And reliable power has more value than unreliable power. Net metering is going to slowly disappear in California, and so the incentives for people to put solar on their own roofs are going to disappear.
Yep. So I'd like to address a little bit of what you've asked, Scott. I think to get that cradle to grave environmental type cost figured out, you first have to figure out what is the cost per ton or the damage per ton of emissions, because you need to figure out what is the damage we're doing by staying on gas for the home and having those increased emissions, and count that into the costs. And those are some big numbers, what the damage is that it can do per ton. On the lots of studies are finding $70 to $200 a ton. And gas is cheap right now because there's a high flow of it and it's been fracked a lot. So it is available, but PG&E is also changing the way the rates are set. Robert mentioned that high rates on the tier system used to get up to, he mentioned around 50 cents a kilowatt hour. PG&E and the PUC have now decreased those two differentials to 25%. So now it's something like it's going to be 22 cents for the bottom tier, 27, and then 34 for the top tier. But over time, they're learning more about the economics of what it's going to take to attack the climate problem. And so they're flattening electric rates so that they don't penalize consumption. And they're going to mold them, as Robert's mentioning, into a more time-dependent pattern so that we get incentives to use more while the sun's out and use less in the dark. And then electric technologies will help us do a little bit of storage of that and shifting it around. So there are going to be ways to deal with all this. We've got a lot of advancements in electric technologies, in solar panels, in storage, in controls. So we will get through this. We can work together to attack climate change. And so I just want to ask, if we don't use reach codes, do the other speakers have an idea for how we would attack climate change?
Price carbon. Very simple.
Los Altos should price
The other
carbon.
thing that I would say with respect to what you're saying of, as someone who's been a shameless advocate for dynamic pricing and talked to probably every PUC commissioner since 1980 to 5 or 6 to now on it, and no progress. So it's a tough one, and so I hope things change, but it, you know, there's just a the technology is not the barrier. It is the willingness to subject people to these prices that is the problem. And the disbelief. So I certainly hope you're right.
Robert, any last comment from you?
Just in terms of where CO2 is really produced, shift manufacturing back into the U.S. because China is by far the largest CO2 emitter. Okay, and it's because we've offshored our production to where they don't feel the same about CO2 emissions.
Well, we're going to conclude our discussion today. I think we could go on for a couple more hours easily. But for those who are viewing, first of all, thank you for your time and your participation in viewing what we offer today. We hoped that this was informative and educational. Speakers, what an incredible group of 3 you are. A special thanks to Tom, who really was our replacement. We had invited a speaker from SVCE, and he declined and referred us to Tom. And Tom, you did a wonderful job of presenting that perspective. Dr. Wallach, my goodness, your expertise is so valuable to not only this community, but this state and this country. Thank you. And Robert, your wonderful insights and your efforts to become an expert are extremely valuable, and thank you for them. The subject of energy, its economics and its environmental impacts is very, very important to every one of us. It's essential. This affects every one of us on this planet now, and especially for those that come after us. An informed public is also important. As someone said, knowledge is power. Informed people, informing them, and an informed people in a fair and objective way was our reason for doing this. We want people to be informed. We want people to think through these issues. And so we wanted an objective, fairly presented panel discussion, and the 3 of you were wonderful in doing that. So for you viewers, we encourage you to express your opinions on the subject of reach codes. If you are local residents to the city of Los Altos, the city council, and if you go beyond this jurisdiction, this area, to your city councils, wherever. But the important thing is to be educated, to be informed, to understand the pros and cons of each of the alternatives that we face. If you found this panel discussion to be valuable, please share it with others. And if you'd like further information about the activities of the Los Altos residents, LAR, here is how you can learn more about us, about our work and our goals. Please visit our website, which is losaltosresidents.org, www.losaltosresidents.org. And we thank you for watching and being part of this marvelous panel. I wish there were more like this. We appreciate your time. Thank you again, panelists. And we look forward to seeing you in the future.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.